Here we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and others who are non-binary and cisgender and anything else you can come up with. This is the Bob Unger Show. I am very privileged to have the author of a great book, and it's a very clever title because it's a takeoff on Al Gore's book called An Inconvenient Truth. His book is called Inconvenient Minority by Kenny Xu. And he's a Chinese gentleman. Probably, am I correct in assuming you were born in the United States?
You are correct. I was born in Maryland.
That's what I figured, because you don't have an accent. And your parents were born in mainland, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. And you grew up, I think, in Princeton. Is that correct?
Princeton, New Jersey. I lived 13 years of my life in Richmond, Virginia. Then I moved to Princeton when I was in high school.
Okay. And you
Different
went to
culture.
I got it. Yeah. And you went to Davidson College?
Yes.
Okay. And now you are a writer and a journalist. And what else can you characterize yourself as?
Wow. Well, I would say I've been writing for a very long time. I've been writing since I was 6 years old. I've always been interested in it. I would say that I'm a freedom fighter. You know, we want in this country, right? I mean, we want people to be treated according to their skills and their character, not according to their race or their background. And I see this very dangerous ideology in our culture today that started when I was in college, when I was at Davidson College, being taught about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it needs to replace, treatment on the basis of merit. And I fought to oppose that. And so I was an activist in that regard. But then the Harvard discrimination cases against Asian Americans took hold, and I decided, hey, I'm a writer. I need to put these skills into good use for my community. So I wrote An Inconvenient Minority, and it's going to be published by Diversion Books in July 13th.
Very good. And when did you first have your epiphany that something was very wrong?
I always knew that it was wrong for universities to discriminate on the basis of race. When I was in high school, my Chinese American community was just, they really wanted their kids to get into Ivy League schools, things like that. And there are issues with that. There really are. But then there are also issues on the other side when universities use that against them and they say, you're too smart, you have no personality, we don't want too many of you. And that's what Harvard University is doing against Asian Americans. I experienced that in high school. My friends experienced that. They experienced, not just the rejection, but the demeaning comments made by admissions officers, against people like them. And I decided, hey, this isn't, why are we still not talking about this? Why is our society obsessed with discrimination? We're not talking about the real discrimination that exists at these elite universities. So I set out to write about it. And I think this is just going to be a compelling, really interesting story for your audience and anybody who cares about our education system.
Well, of course, where I live here, a lot of Chinese families, and they're very focused on getting into Ivy League schools, and they do preparatory courses. And I, of course, advise them that they're very wrong, because I don't think school means a hill of beans, and I'm an attorney, and I think it is just a waste of money. In fact, the best students are the homeschooled students who know how to teach reading and writing and grammar and aren't obsessed with transgender education. So now it's, I tell my Chinese clients, you guys don't know it, but you bought a round trip ticket. They're back in the Cultural Revolution now, and that's what we're having here. So
wow.
Do you get negative feedback from your own people, and what kind of feedback do you get from other groups of people?
I'll tell you, ordinary Chinese Asian Americans, they're totally with me in this cause. Totally with me in this cause, fighting race discrimination, because the narrative today on the left is that Asian Americans are like white people. That's what they're saying. In a sense, we have the same privilege, we are adjacent in white supremacy. Why? Not because we came from wealth. We didn't. Most of our parents and immigrants came here with no wealth. We actually didn't even come here with English skills. But because we worked hard and we emphasized academics, now people are coming after us, saying, you are just trying to conform to white values. And I think that that's a racist statement to make. Because since when did working hard and being academically excellent was just a white value? It's a value that every American should aspire to. It's a value that we should be treated by. And so that's why I wrote An Inconvenient Minority, to tell about this attack on Asian American excellence, but really the larger excellence ideal in our country.
What are the mechanics of how the attack is being orchestrated?
So I'll illustrate how it is at Harvard, and then I can extrapolate that to all of the environments that we're experiencing today in our media and business. But here's what Harvard does. Harvard wants a diverse student body, and they're willing to discriminate against higher qualified Asian Americans just to achieve this diverse student body. What Harvard does is that they take these the excellent Asian Americans and their application system. And the new public evidence shows that Harvard assigns these Asian American applicants low personality scores. Personality. What is a personality in terms of Harvard? It's about likability, charisma, humor. Asian Americans routinely get these lower personality scores with no objective evidence to correlate it, because you're just looking at an application. How are you going to tell somebody's personality from that? And alumni interviews Asian Americans do just as well. So there's no objective evidence in that regard either. But they assign them these lower personality scores so that they can justify to themselves that Asian Americans are not qualified applicants to come into Harvard University, and so that they can racially balance the class. And as a result, Asian Americans have to score 440 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black American. And they have a 10th of a chance of admission as a Black American, a 5th of a chance as a Hispanic American, and a lower chance than white Americans to get into these elite universities.
There's a book by Charles Sykes called Dumbing Down Your Kids, which the schools definitely have done a wonderful job in pursuing. And in the book, he points out a study that was done when they asked Asian students to quantify and qualify their ability mathematically. And invariably, the Asian students expressed humility and said, we need a lot of work. We're not adequate up to par. We need to work harder. And so they had low, they called it mathematics self-esteem. And guess which group of people had the highest mathematics self-esteem? Blacks. And that's why the subtitle of the book is Why American Kids Can't Read, Write, or Add, but Feel Wonderful About Themselves.
Wow. That is so interesting. I have to take a look at that study, because opportunities, look, everybody, we all need to do better at math. As a country, we're like 42nd in terms of developed countries in our proficiency in math. And if we as a country don't improve and we focus on raising people's self-esteem in math rather than actually teaching skills, we're going to find ourselves losing this tech competition with China, this economic competition with India, and then that's not good for our country. That's not good for anybody.
Has your book been reviewed yet?
I've gotten reviews from Kirkus, from Heather McDonald, City Journal.
I know. Yeah, I know.
She's wonderful. She wrote a wonderful review of the book.
She wrote The Diversity Delusion.
She wrote The Diversity Delusion, which talks about the modern diversity and equity and inclusion movement. And the crazy thing about the modern diversity, equity, and inclusion movement is that it's actually anti-Asian, right? Because when they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're not talking about Asian Americans. They're talking about other minorities. And so Asian Americans are actually aligned with the white people as targets for culling, because they're overrepresented in these elite, universities, and they're overrepresented in businesses like Facebook and Google and other Fortune 500 companies. So when other people hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, I hear anti-Asian.
No question about it. I mean, you remind me of what my father told me. I was about 6 years old, because one of my classmates, his parents were from Taiwan, and they owned a laundry business in my neighborhood. And their last name was Louis, and the boy's name was Eddie. And he went with me all the way through the Bronx High School of Science. And my father would bring me into the store, and I was just a little boy, and he'd say, look at those Chinese people. Look at how they're living in the back of the store. Look at how they're working so hard. Look at how their kids are so respectful to older people. That is part of what America used to be. Unfortunately, that has changed. And you'll see that as these Chinese, Korean kids, what have you, as they become Americanized, they'll become as disrespectful as the native born. And that's unfortunate because
it's already happening. And part of my book, An Inconvenient Minority, I talk about the Chinese Americans and the Asian Americans that have been indoctrinated by these universities to believe that their parents are racists. Right now, there's a woman named Eileen Huang, Yale University English graduate, wrote a paper, an essay, a viral essay, claiming that the essence of Asian American is to be anti-Black. And she cites isolated racist incidents from her own parents. And I mean, this is the culture that we're becoming, where people are willing to throw their own families under the bus in the name of racial ideology. And it affects Asian Americans just as well.
What would you suggest that people that want to help your cause, which really is just an American cause, it's a cause for equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. What can Chinese people and all people do?
Well, I would say educate with reading my book, An Inconvenient Minority. It's available for pre-order. I have a podcast coming out called Inconvenient Minority Podcast. You can find that on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, everything. And then also, I would say just get involved with local elections. Get involved with the school board elections. You know, if you want to save math in our school, we need your help. You know, because we shouldn't turn to people with education studies degrees to learn how to teach math. We shouldn't turn to people with gender studies degrees to learn how to teach science, right? You are ultimately in charge of the future. And in this country, if you don't speak up, you will get flattened. And that's the reality of what it is in America, like it or not. Asian Americans traditionally have not voted, have not been involved in the political process. They need to get started right now.
Yeah, I had a Chinese businesswoman admonish me for speaking out because she said, you're going to lose business. And I said to her, I won't mention her name, I said to her, if you don't open your mouth and wake up, you're not going to have a business. And that's what people don't realize. I wrote a book back in the late 80s. It was called America Does Not Owe You a Living, and it sold very well. And I pointed out to people that it doesn't matter what your goals are. If you're living in Cuba and Castro tells you to pick the sugar cane and you say, no, Fidel, I want to be a lawyer. He'll say, well, I'm very glad you want to be a lawyer. And he'll take out his gun and say, bang, and you're dead. Without liberty, without freedom, there's no such thing as goals, because goals are, and when you have a government that's gotten out of control like this one has, and it's not just Biden and the Democrats, this has been going on for 100 years, little by little. It's like the frog boiling, the classic frog boiling in the pot. And we've allowed this to happen. And I gave a speech at St. John for the COVID fascism lockdown. I told the kids, go home tonight and punch your parents in the face for what they've allowed to happen to this country, because people don't speak out. And people like yourself and I, it's irrelevant what race we are. If you have a neighbor, you want the neighbor to share your values. what good is a neighbor who shares your values? And I should say, what good is a neighbor who doesn't share your values, even if he's the same race? Who cares what his race is if he doesn't share your values? And that's what people have to understand. And that's what we all together, and we are, talk about an inconvenient minority. People with are a minority. People who can think are a minority. And this is why your book is so important, to make people realize that we're dealing with facts here, not feelings. And, I really have to compliment you for taking this on. Are you being attacked? Have there been any attacks in the media?
Well, we haven't done our huge publicity run yet, but I anticipate I will get attacked. Yes.
So far they're laying off you.
So far, because it's you can't counter facts. It's like Thomas Sowell said, you're entitled to your own opinions, not your own facts.
Yeah. Well,
I
Thomas
mean,
Sowell.
when we say Asian Americans have to score 440 points higher on the SAT, they have the same chance of admission as Black Americans to Harvard. You can't contest that. It's just there, objectively. They've done the data.
If you read Dr. Sowell's book, Inside American Education by Dr. Tom, it's fantastic. Yeah. And it was written like 30 years ago. And it predicts exactly what is happening now. Exactly.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, because people assume that just because teachers in Great Neck and in Princeton and upper class areas, just because they're paid a lot of money, does not mean they're competent, and does not mean they want to teach your kid academics. They're teaching them ideology. And it was very sad that when they had a Black Lives Matter march over here, half the kids marching were Asian, okay, supporting a communist cause, because they're being brainwashed in these elementary schools. It starts early. And how were you able to overcome it? Because I'm sure when you were a kid, they were hitting you with all this liberalism.
Well, I was a Christian before I became a conservative. Defending my faith in the public sphere is one of the hardest things you could possibly do in high school. People would attack me for that. So I had to be prepared and on my guard. And that prepared me for this moment. I mean, politics is easy.
Isn't it interesting that you have a biblical foundation, and how people, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Gentile, people have a biblical foundation, believe in objective truth and objective right and wrong. I asked Brandon Tatum, you familiar?
I know him, yes.
Yeah, I asked him on my show, what made you change and stop hating white people? He said, the minute I found God. Because when I found God, my perspective and my metrics totally changed.
Right.
And that was my metric, not color.
Right.
So
well, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon is a great guy. Tell people how they can get your book. Tell them how they can keep track of what you're doing, and tell them about what your plans are for the future.
Well, you can follow me at Kenny M. Shu on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And pre-order my book. We need pre-orders because you get first week sales credit for New York Times bestseller purposes. And if the book becomes a New York Times bestseller, you can bet there's going to be a lot of attention on your cause. So if you want to fight for equal rights, it's a great way that you can do it. And then also, I'll be debuting, and this is when you can follow me, with a new effort called Colorists United. And it'll be a major nonprofit that's going into the media and combating these race narratives that are going on in our country today. And I'll be the president of that. So I invite your followers to also follow me and seek that.
You know, if you ever get yourself out near New York, I'll arrange to have an audience for you, and I'll get all the Chinese business people to bring out all their clients and customers, and we could get a pretty big crowd. because you have thousands of Chinese people here who are very interested in this subject. This is something that does affect them. And if you want to contact me at any time, let me know and give me advance notice. And
What's
I'll
your
set up.
email?
My email is JONBIRC54 AOL.com. You know who John Birch was?
I know John Birch. Yeah,
You know who he was?
he was a conservative guy, right?
He was a Christian missionary in China, and he was the first American murdered by Mao's troops.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Wow.
why I gave myself that email.
So John Birch, what's the number?
John Birch 54.
54.
It's spelled without an H, no H, Jon.
Oh, okay.
John Birch 54
Yep.
at AOL.com.
Got it.
I'm not
Thank
tech,
you.
I'm not a tech guy. Anyway, God bless you. And do not falter. Stay strong. Because
Thank you for the encouragement.
ultimately, when you stand before God, He's not going to ask you if you were politically correct. He's going to ask you, what did you do to stand up for right and wrong? And if you did a good job, I think your outcome will be favorable.
Thank you, Robert. I really appreciate it.
Okay,
Appreciate
God
being on
bless
your
you.
show. God bless.
Tai
Bye bye.
Jian.
Chai Chen.